Hi, and thanks for joining us for Special Report Online. I'm Brett Baer. If you haven't been here before, welcome aboard. It's a great forum to continue the conversation. You can ask questions, make comments, or just listen. That's fine, too. We will read some of them throughout the show. We are lucky to be joined by our Chief Washington Correspondent, James Rosen, center of the storm again, Tucker Carlson, Chuck Lane, and Charles Krauthammer. We just finished a panel about the State Department situation and the deleting of the briefing from December of 2013 and their explanation of it today, James. Your thoughts on all this?
Well, I'm grateful to Admiral Kirby, first of all, for taking this seriously and for pressing an internal investigation. Some people feel he didn't press it far enough, and that's understandable, but it's a very different tone than we heard from, than previously from the State Department. And he took it seriously. He got the Office of the Legal Advisor involved, and so I appreciate all that. So
just in a nutshell, and we explained it on the show, but it started with a question in February 2013 to then spokesperson Victoria Nuland about ongoing, and if there were, government-to-government negotiations between the U.S. and Iran.
Right. I had gotten a tip to that effect, and I just asked point blank, are there any secret, direct bilateral talks between members of the Obama administration and Iran? Of the kind of government-to-government contacts you're talking about, Victoria Nuland said no. And then by that point, we later learned, those direct, secret bilateral talks had been ongoing for more than a year. When they were finally disclosed, I went back to the briefing room, and this time Jen Psaki was the State Department spokesperson, and I asked her, when the previous briefer told me that there were no such talks, that was untrue, correct? And there was a lot of sort of dancing around the subject, and finally I asked the question that you see. It's a small footnote, appropriate for telling here on SRO, that the actual transcript of this exchange, I think, is mistaken by one letter. But be that as it may, what I asked Jen Psaki was, is it the policy of the State Department that it is permissible, in order to preserve the secrecy of secret negotiations, to lie in order to advance that goal? And she basically said, in essence, yes, when she said there are times when diplomacy needs privacy, and this was one of those times. And there the matter rested for 2 years or so, until the Ben Rhodes controversy erupted about how they sold the Iran deal and whether they were deceptive about the origins of and the timing of the Iran talks. I said to my producer, Garen Hayes, please go retrieve that exchange I had with Jen Psaki in December 2013, and he came back and told me, it's gone. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's a white flash edit where the entire 8 minutes of your exchange with her used to be.
So fast forward, then it becomes a focus of not only your questioning, but others in the briefing room.
Right.
At which point, is it Elizabeth Trudeau?
That's right.
Who says it was a glitch.
Right. Now, I know Elizabeth Trudeau from her previous service as a spokesperson for the U.S. mission to NATO in Brussels. I think she's a very talented diplomat and public affairs officer, but she saw fit to describe it as a glitch. The only way it could logically be described as a glitch is if one were to call it a glitch in our operational protocols, let's say. But it was by no means a technical glitch. It was obvious to even 13-year-olds who have mastered Final Cut Pro in their parents' basement that was a deliberate edit.
Yeah.
Today we had Admiral Kirby admit as much, and it's a significant moment whenever the United States government admits, A, we lied from a podium, B, we later admitted we lied, and then C, we tried to cover up our admission that we had lied, D, we are now admitting that we tried to cover up our admission. It goes on and on.
Yeah, and the fact that the investigation has stopped is kind of mind-boggling, and we'll see where this goes. But Charles, you're saying, and you said during the commercial break, that there is reason to be concerned or focused on the substance of this back and forth, and not just the actual edit of the question from the video.
Right. Well, there are two stories here. One is the one that we have been talking about, the lying, covering up, pretending, uncovering, and then not pursuing, which is where we are. But then there's the actual substance of this story. Why did they lie? What were they protecting? And why was that relevant, particularly after the Ben Rhodes interview? Because Rhodes admitted that they had deceived the press, deceived the American people, actually co-opted a part of the press in their liberal echo chamber to propagate a deception that the entire Iran negotiation was a response of capitalizing on the election of moderates in Iran. Well, that sets a timeline. In fact, we now learn that the secret negotiations began long before that. So it was not seizing an opportunity of a change in mood in Tehran. It was pursuing an idea that the president had that he wanted a rapprochement with Iran. Moderates were hardline, and obviously it was hardline at the time. And it was in pursuit of that that we ended up with the Iran deal. And that, I think, is sort of the central deception that Rhodes was alluding to in saying he set up the echo chamber. Because that was the premise. That's exactly what the Congress was told. It's what the Congress had bought, and it was a lie.
Madrian writes in, has James hired a food taster yet?
It's good of you to volunteer, Brett.
The glitch is they got caught, says 668. King for a Day says it's obvious the State Department tried to cover up the answer. This just seems like typical Obama political machine at work. Meanwhile, Ben Rhodes gets 27-year-old reporters to buy into Iran deal. Sounds like Obama got what he wanted. Chuck, do you think this will be followed up on? I mean, we read the tweet from Glenn Kessler, and Eric Wemple has done a blog post, apparently. Also, your colleagues have...
Sounds like it has been followed up on, but I think a lot's going to depend on what the State Department itself does. Because I think it's very gracious of James to give credit to Admiral Kirby for following up on this to the extent that he has. But one had the impression watching him that he had kind of run into a brick wall somewhere inside the State Department himself. Will the rest of the State Department press corps start to press on him for further information? I mean, I think that'll have I mean, if they just sort of make Kirby's life miserable at that podium, or make everyone's life miserable at that podium, whoever gets behind it over the next few days, then it might shake something more loose out of the State Department bureaucracy.
Well, listen, the State Department IG report has not made it easy for anybody over there at the podium either. Mark Toner had a tough couple of days answering the State Department.
Well, I mean, that reminds me that the classic person to look at this would be the State Department IG, wouldn't it? Because this is, you know, an internal State Department misfeasance or malfeasance, if it ever was, and it would seem that that's the person who ought to be tasked with investigating it.
So can they say, Tucker, that the investigation stops? I mean, we're all focused on this records law when it comes to Hillary Clinton's email. I mean, isn't this...
Of course not. I mean, it was done on a State Department computer with State Department software, presumably. I think it had to have been. And how hard is that to track? Not very hard, if they wanted to, presumably. And I have to say, I did omit something earlier in the show that I said in a commercial break, and I feel I should say it out loud, which is that James Rosen is the smartest and most articulate reporter on television, and that question was so artful, I thought, and evocative, it turned out. You got Jen Psaki to concede that they had been lying about the bilateral meetings with Iran.
That was in the 7th minute of the 8 minutes, probably.
Well, it was fantastic.
Thank you.
For the first 6 minutes, he was not the most brilliant guy on TV, but then for the 7th and 8th
But you pulled it out!
But see, we can only run so much because we have a show. You know, so
let me
only pick the best.
one point?
But I have a question, in a way, for all of us, which is, what did they think they were going to accomplish here? You had your camera on the meeting. Everybody, there were 10 cameras.
The transcript remained intact, so it wasn't a full-throated effort at censorship. But
I mean, it wasn't. It was a reflex. It was an authoritarian reflex, the same as all authoritarian regimes, attempting to control the past in order to shape the future. I mean, it wasn't thought out.
Orwellian in that sense. Yeah. I would say that one logical, having been in this town long enough, one logical way in which this proceeds from here is if members of Congress would query the State Department Inspector General. That's typically one of the ways these things unfold at a juncture like this.
You know, I guess what it brings to mind is that, yes, this incident is egregious and it's horrific in its, you know, the scope or the audacity to do it. But in the big picture, it just brings up questions about what else from podiums in this administration have they been, one, lying about and two, covering up.
Well, that's exactly, I mean, it raises exactly that. You're going to tell me, look, you've told me lies, you covered it up, you now admit it, but you're not going to pursue it. You're going to tell me now this is the only instance, and he didn't say it. Kirby was asked, can you assure us, by you, I guess, that this is the only instance, and he said no. So it does raise I mean, this is so egregious, you got to ask yourself. And also, as Chuck indicates, it makes no sense in the end, because it can be found out, because it depends on having reporters who aren't as inquisitive and dogged as you are and skilled at getting the information. But this can't be the only case, and this really is, at a very high level, scandalous. You shouldn't, a democratic government ought not be changing the records it has in order to alter the past. That's what they do. That's a definition of Soviet-style totalitarianism. And it is about the worst. It's Kafkaesque, and it's the worst. This may be a trivial incident, but it implies that these people are trying to control the past, and that is an awful thing. It's got to be found out.
It's always been my aspiration since childhood to find myself at the center of something Kafkaesque, so thank you, Charles.
This is not the first time either.
No,
Are you sure it's Kafkaesque and not Orwellian? We're kind of
maybe Hitchcockian.
Yeah.
I'm up for anything.
But mid-century dark, I think.
Tomorrow, if you wake up feeling like an insect,
Yes.
let us know. And then
If you begin to, as we say, metamorphosize.
Let's see, W988, blatant is a word for it, Brett. Next time Kirby is under oath, someone needs to ask him, did anyone tell you to stop researching the video editing? If so, who? I think there will be an investigation that goes beyond this, but we'll see where it goes. I want to play this soundbite from President Obama tonight from PBS Town Hall, in which he finally mentions Donald Trump's name. It's like he was Voldemort or something, because he wasn't actually saying Donald Trump's name until I think it was Gwen Ifill and Judy Woodruff pressed him on it tonight.
Why don't you mention Donald Trump by name?
He seems to do a good job mentioning his own name. I think Trump is a more colorful character than some of the other Republican elected officials. But a lot of the story that he's telling is entirely consistent with what folks have been saying about me, or the general story they've been telling about the economy for the last 7.5, the last 10, the last 20, the last 30 years.
Tucker, that's kind of the message you had on the stump today.
Right.
Is Donald Trump may sound and look different, but he's essentially the same Republican dressed in, billionaire clothing.
Boy, he is a different kind of Republican. I mean, that's obvious, I think, to everyone else. Two things strike me here. One, it's so odd to see the most powerful man in the world play the victim, as the president often does. How strange. If he's a victim, who isn't? And the second point is, is he intentionally ignoring the reality of modern America? This week we learned that life expectancy for the first time in the last century, maybe ever, has fallen for significant parts of the population in America. It's not a measure of everything, but it's a measure of something. And it's a tragedy. I mean, his numbers are above 50, but the right track, wrong track numbers, how is the country doing? Are we moving in the right direction? Are completely upside down. And that is to some extent a referendum on him and his stewardship of the country.
Well, Chuck, I heard somebody say that once his numbers went above 50, that Hillary Clinton's chances exponentially increased, because as a potential third-term President Obama administration, if he's above 50, that the Democrat has a better chance.
Yeah, I think there's, to the extent these things can ever be forecast, there's a lot of evidence to suggest from past elections that when the incumbent party's president is up above 50% in his approval rating, the chances improve for whoever the successor would be. And nevertheless, it is a very difficult feat to pull off. I think George H.W. Bush is the only one in recent history to do it, right? To get that third term.
Since 52, yeah.
Yeah, to get that third term for the same party. And it's pretty clear that given that Hillary's negatives are as high as they are, she's going to have to get an assist from somebody. And you saw her doing this earlier in the primary season, grabbing Barack Obama around the waist and holding on as hard as she could in South Carolina primary and elsewhere. Her victory is going to have to be made, if it's going to happen at all, by patching back together the Obama coalition. And, that's minorities, women, young people, so forth and so on, the people who showed up in big numbers in 08. And that's her path to victory, coupled with the high negatives that Trump has.
WV Redneck 54 writes, if Trump is wrong and the president is right, why does Trump have a following at all? We're hurting out here in the real world. Get a clue.
Well, my view is that Obama, the rise in his numbers, going above 50%, is not related to a change in the mood of the country, which, as you say, we're still, the wrong track numbers for the country are still where they were, is that he's disappeared. And whenever he disappears, his numbers rise. And whenever he's on the stage, the public stage a lot, his numbers go down. He's been abroad. Everything has been overshadowed by Trump, by the nomination, by Hillary, Sanders, and that's why he went down. And when you don't see him, people like him a lot more. I think that's going to change if and when he gets heavily involved in the campaign. And how good How good a shape could the country be? How could Obama speak about himself so glowingly and denigrate the Fox and conservative critics for saying that the country isn't in good shape, when the leading challenger in his own party, the one to whom Hillary has had to respond and to move left all the way, is calling for a political revolution?
Yeah, but he's not justified.
You've just been around for 8 years. People are cheering. The crowds are huge. He's won a whole bunch of states. He's run neck and neck, running on a political revolution after 8 years of Obama. So what does that say
Which
about
is
Obama?
many people typing in the same thing. Willie on. If the economy is so good, Mr. President, why are Bernie and Hillary constantly saying change is needed?
Well, in part because they're campaigning among an electorate that's dominated, as the primaries always are, by the farthest to the left of the Democratic Party. That's part of it.
Clearly, they're not happy.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a situation now where we have 5% unemployment rate in this country. We have essentially no inflation. Wages have begun to rise over the last year. Those are facts. Those are statistical facts. Okay, and I think part of what's going on in this country is that we have so little consensus. There's so much polarization. The parties have perfected the art of complaint and grievance as a way of mobilizing the base, that no one is able to focus on the fact that conditions have improved. They're not perfect. They're not great, but they have improved. It's just a fact.
You know the retort to all of that. One, that the underemployment rate is very high, and that they don't believe that the employment rate is there, and that people have stopped looking for work, which is why the numbers have changed that much. Two, that companies are still skittish about bringing money back into the country, and that there are trillions of dollars overseas. And three, that people are feeling the pinch about Obamacare and other things that businesses.
I know all those things. And first of all, labor force participation is back up, so the underemployment thing is also not really accurate anymore. But the fundamental point here is, compared to what? Okay, and I think a reasonable person looks at the circumstances around him and doesn't just ask, how does it compare to what I would ideally like to have, but how does it compare to recent past and recent other conditions?
But I don't know if the new normal is a good thing to put on a bumper sticker.
I'll tell you what they compare it to, which is the progress of the top 1%. I'm hardly a socialist. I'm the opposite. I'm a total markets guy. I have been my whole life. But the truth, if you look at the numbers you keep referring to, is that the top segment of the population has gotten richer than any time in American history, while the rest of the population has stagnated. Now, conservatives have denied that because it somehow seems a challenge to capitalism. It's not. It's true. And ignoring reality doesn't get you anywhere. It gets you Donald Trump and it gets you Bernie Sanders. And the other point I would make is that it's totally unfair and a distortion to describe Bernie as purely a phenomenon of the hard left. Yes, of course, they support him. Go to a Bernie rally. It's not all Trotskyites and nutcases or kids who are smoking weed in the parking lot. There are a lot of middle class.
There's overlap amongst those groups.
Well, there are, but no, it is people, like some ordinary people, non-lunatic, non-ideologues, especially from rural areas, who feel genuine and real economic anxiety.
Can I just return us to the subject of the Gwen Ifill-Obama exchange? To the extent that Donald Trump is susceptible to any kind of conventional political attack or attempts at framing and definition of him, and the lesson so far of this cycle may well be that he is not, or that he's uniquely invulnerable to that kind of typical political framing and defining by others. I discerned something of some cognitive dissonance between what President Obama was saying to Gwen Ifill about Donald Trump, that he's the same old Republican, just in different hair and clothes, and the case that Hillary Clinton is trying to advance about Donald Trump, that he is singularly unqualified and singularly dangerous. And so it'll be interesting as the cycle unfolds, and again, even presuming that Hillary Clinton remains in contention, to see the degree to which the indictments of Donald Trump that are lodged in the court of public opinion by President Obama, who's effectively acting as a surrogate for the Clinton campaign, and Hillary Clinton herself, will actually align. And I think they run a risk if they don't.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the economy real quick, Chuck. I mean, a lot of people typing in that they feel that the economy is not there. They point to the GDP, the growth being pretty stagnant. And they say, and I think experts back this up, that the recovery has been anemic. While it is recovering, it is not recovering like we could have recovered.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying the economy is great. I'm not saying everything is... Obviously, everything that I'm saying is true. I'm saying that it is not unreasonable for a person to look around and say, well, you know what? We're doing better than Europe is doing. We're doing better than we were 3 or 4 years ago. And by the way, when Mitt Romney was running for president, what did he promise the unemployment rate would be by the end of his first term, i.e. by now? I think he said 6%. Am I right about that?
Probably.
Yeah.
It was at 10,
it's now 5. Okay, it was in the high 8s when he was running. And so I'm just trying to say, like, if you take a fair and balanced view of the economic situation in the United States right now, there's some good news, there's mixed with some bad news. It's not catastrophic.
When you're saying,
not catastrophic.
The question is,
now there's a bumper sticker.
What do you mean?
Yes. Things could be worse.
It is not catastrophic.
When
Hashtag.
you say we are not doing so badly, the question is, who is we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it's you and me and Tucker and the rest of us here, I think that's true. But in fact, it's not us. I mean, there's a large swath of the population, obvious in the rallies, in the kids who can't get jobs and are drowning in debt or living with their parents, and on the Republican side with particularly working class, non-college educated people who are getting crushed. And that's where the discontent is coming. Of course, it's not from everyone, but that's the reason that you have Sanders running on a political revolution and Trump running on, trust me, I will give you everything.
You know, in Washington, right outside our studios yesterday on Capitol Hill, I was waiting for a red light to change so I could cross the street, and in front of me was a young African-American man who had a T-shirt on, and the back of the T-shirt showed an image of Barack Obama in sort of heroic psychedelic vision, and the lettering on the T-shirt said, "Barack Obama's got my back." And as I looked at that T-shirt and just looked at the young man, I thought to myself, but did he? Because, Charles, what has been the plight of African-American young males in the Obama era? Have they advanced? Has their unemployment rate diminished? Are young black Americans doing better in this country under Barack Obama? Did he have their back? You tell me.
Yeah.
It's a pretty complicated question. I would just say we recently had data showing out that on this life expectancy point, since that's our metric, is that's now at an all-time high for African Americans. But you know, I mean, we can. And
what is the caliber of the life lived, though? Will be the next question.
I don't know. I guess I would take that T-shirt wearer's view of the situation over anybody at this table. That's how I guess I would answer.
All right. Last thing on this. Civil labor force participation rate has had an uptick, but it's roughly where it was in 1978. So it's still down overall.
So as good as Jimmy Carter.
Here is Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump on winning in November.
I think Trump is electable, but he'll have to carry those purple states. And these are full of voters that can go either way.
What I'm going to do is I want to focus on 15 or so states because we have to win. And I want my energy to be put in the states where it could go either way. And we're going to play heavy, as an example, in California. Now, no other Republican would, they wouldn't even go to dinner in California. And we're going to focus on New York.
Okay, Donald Trump saying he's going to focus on 15 states, Tucker, and he's saying we're going to go to California and focus on New York. All right, let's just be honest. Donald Trump is not going to win California or New York.
Probably not. But that's 5 more states than anybody thought were going to be in play this cycle. I mean, look, the Republican structural disadvantage is so profound because of demographic change, and frankly, the Obama presidency, lots of factors, mostly demographics, that there's no chance a Republican's going to win a national election unless somebody just takes the entire monopoly board and throws it on the floor and says, reconstruct it. That's not an endorsement of Trump. I'm merely saying, again, to your question, compared to what? Compared to rerunning the Romney campaign? I mean, which was, of course, the hope of virtually everyone else, the other 16? That wasn't going to work. So will Trump get elected? I don't know. Probably not. But he's the only person running this cycle who had a chance of it. That's my view. I'm sure no one agrees. But
Charles, you got to remember who he's running against. And what made Obama unique as a candidate is he managed to expand the electorate of his inherent constituencies, meaning African Americans, meaning Hispanics, meaning young people, meaning single women. And it's not just that he won them. Of course he won them. Democrats always win them. But the turnout was so historic that it was that excess that put him over the top. So the question for a Democrat, of those who say, well, it's a demographic destiny that the Democrats are going to be the presidential party because of those demographics, No, the question is, can the next candidate, the non-Obama, the non-charismatic candidate, be able to turn out these sort of inherent, normal Democratic constituencies in abnormal numbers? And, you know, I'm sure because of Trump there'll be a huge increase in Hispanic turnout, etc. But I'm not sure that, generally speaking, the Democrats have that demographic lock, because the question is, can they recapitulate Obama's unique performance?
Alan,
I think the answer is no.
Alan in Maryland, Trump has to pull union voters and blue-collar workers. James, it's fair to say that Trump is a unique character in politics. Is it fair to say that he has changed the Republican Party, or is he an anomaly in the Republican Party?
I think, first of all, he hasn't changed the party. He's exposed or shined a light on what the party actually is right now. And that didn't necessarily sit well with some of the party elites. But whenever you have a disruptive figure in any discipline, whether it's sports or politics or even art or anything else, and it looks like this person could represent a complete shift of the paradigm, you have to step back and really you have to wait a little bit to see if that turns out to be the case. Muhammad Ali, for what a singular genius he was as a boxer, didn't ultimately change the sport or the economics of boxing, where he used to take the heavyweight title fights on the road to, say, Kuala Lumpur and Zaire and so forth. As soon as Muhammad Ali was faded from the scene, it was back to Atlantic City and Las Vegas and a kind of a corruption over the sport. So he was a singular figure, but he didn't change his discipline. And so I don't think that Donald Trump means the end of the Republican Party, as some have forecast. I don't think he necessarily portends some great shift in the Republican Party. I think, and he may not represent any real shift in the way politics is conducted, whether it's the Twitter campaigns or his other antics. He may just be a singular character with no paradigmatic shift attached to him, but the jury's obviously out.
If he was August, who would he be?
It depends on whether he wins or loses.
Somebody who favored orange.
If he wins,
what kind of tree would he be?
If he wins, he'll change the party, he'll change the country. If he loses, he'll be a parenthesis.
I mean, he's trying to make it a workers' party. He's trying to make it a middle class.
I think he's changed things already. That was the thing I disagreed with most, that the president said to Gwen Ifill, that he's the same old Republican. Totally disagree with that. He is the,
I mean, look at it on trade.
He's repudiated them on trade. He's repudiated them on entitlements, and in fact, he has
taxes.
He has allied himself with those at the grassroots who believe the leadership is a bunch of people who've betrayed them. I think he's taken over the party in effect by repudiating it and coming in from the outside.
It's what Trump has preached: you're either a winner or a loser. And if he's a winner, he'll have changed the party.
Yeah, but Muhammad Ali was a winner for many years, but he didn't really change the sport after he was gone.
You want to end with some, like Muhammad Ali?
I mean, how would Howard Cosell?
Yeah, how would Howard Cosell describe?
Okay, round 11. Chuck Lane still stinging, jabbing, moving, sticking on his toes like the Chuck Lane of old.
There was no joke.
I remember the Chuck Lane of old.
The Chuck Lane of
The
old.
Chuck Lane who faced down Sonny Liston.
We knew we could get you there.
Yeah, there we go.
We knew we could get you there. We could actually continue this for a long time if we had an open bar, but we don't, and we have to wrap it up. Special Report Online will be back next week, next Wednesday. By the way, we're going to California for Tuesday, the big hurrah. We'll have the show out in San Diego, actually, and then we'll be back on Wednesday. Control Room, a little goodbye.